Welcome yet again to another episode of Tech from the Far East. Now, up until now, I've only been looking at smaller gadgets on this segment, but this time around, I think I have something that you guys might like. Meet the ID Cooling Auraflow 240, a 240mm liquid cooling loop for your CPU. Now, two things in particular make this guy stand out. Number one, it's 2017, and as per 2017, everything has to be RGB. Now, unlike the Thermotake solution that slaps RGB fans on their already existing Water 3.0 loops, or the NZXT way that has an RGB pump head, but the fans are just your regular old unilluminated fans, this guy does both of them. Yes, my friends, it has both an RGB pump head and RGB LED fans. ID Cooling bundles together an RGB splitter with this loop as well, and you'll obviously need an RGB header on your motherboard to take advantage of all this RGB goodness. But if you don't have an RGB header on your motherboard, ID Cooling has you covered as well, as they include an RGB header to Molex power converter, though with this, you don't get the fanciness of controlling the colors via software, and you're stuck with either choice of red, green, or blue. Let's talk about the second thing that makes this guy special. Now, I couldn't find it on Amazon, but here in Malaysia, it can be had for 349 ringgit. Converted, that's about 82 USD, and that makes it the cheapest AIO cooler out there with RGB illumination that actually looks good enough to be thrown into your system. Not only that, but if you're resourceful enough, you can get it much cheaper if you look up ID Cooling in China. I'm talking 60 US dollars, guys. 60. But all that price doesn't really matter if it doesn't perform. So, does it? Let's talk a little bit about the specs first. Over on ID Cooling's website, the pump head is listed to have a speed of around 2300 RPM, has a really powerful water flow of 96 liters per hour, and apparently does it at just 25 decibels. By all means, if this is true, you shouldn't be able to hear the pump at all through the normal sounds of the PC. The pump head also has compatibility for pretty much all Intel and AMD sockets, including the new AMD AM4 bracket. You don't get shitty looking tubing as well. You get some nice looking sleeve tubes that are 315mm in length, which is shorter than most AIO coolers like the Fractal Design Celsius S24 and the NZXT Kraken X52 that come in at 400mm, but for a small case like mine, it shouldn't matter too much, but it's something to take into consideration if you have a large case, as mounting it in front might be challenging. The radiator has an adequately dense fin array, though it is slightly on the thin side as well at 27mm. In comparison, the NZXT Kraken X52 is 30mm, the Fractal Design Celsius S24 is 31mm, while the Thermotake Water 3.0 is the same at 27mm. This might or might not be a bad thing, as while a thicker radiator in general will give you better heat dissipation properties, if you're running a compact case like mine, clearance is a big issue, and the Auraflow fits in comfortably well where some others might not. ID Cooling includes two RGB fans with this cooler, and they have the model number of SF12025-RGB, where the SF means that the fans are optimized for static pressure. They've also got rubber dampeners on each corner of the frame to help reduce any vibration noise coming from the fans in operation, so that's nice to see, though they don't actually come in contact with the radiator itself and only really work when you're mounting it onto the case. Specs wise, ID Cooling says that they have an operation speed of between 700 to 8800 RPM, push about 74.5 CFM at full speed, with a max static pressure of 2.15mm H2O. Their noise levels are also rated at 18 to 35 decibels, so pretty in line with fans of this specification. speaking of noise levels, let's move on to a little sound testing. I mentioned before that the pump head should be near inaudible when powered up, so let's see how that sounds like with only the pump head turned on. The pump was so incredibly silent that the only way I could make sure that it was actually running was if I put my ears directly near the pump. The good part about running this part of the test is that I get to check the loop out of the system for any leakages that the loop might have. So far so good, so let's move on. Now that we've got a good idea of how the pump head sounds like, let's hear the fans at low speed and full speed. So out of my 3 fans tested, the ID cooling fan was the loudest, but maybe that's expected since it has the highest RPM of all 3 at 2300 RPM. Sound isn't quite everything though, so I did a rudimentary test to see how much airflow it actually pushes in comparison to my Scythe Gentle Typhoon 2150 RPM fans. This part came as a massive shocker as the Gentle Typhoons at a lower RPM and noise levels were able to displace far more air than the ID cooling ones. Based on hand feel, it almost feels like twice the amount of airflow, so that's quite disappointing. All external testing is now done, so it's time to actually stick it into the system and see what it's capable of. Installation process was pretty straightforward and easy, as the manuals had English instructions on how to get it going. And now that it's all done up, I ran it at idle for a while, then I ran Prime 95 after to run it through its paces, and this is how it performs compared to my previous Thermaltake Water 2.0 performer. The results were nothing short of surprising, both in a good and bad way. As you can see, while the Auraflow 240 got a lower temperature on idle, on a synthetic load of Prime 95 for 5 minutes, both my 120mm Water 2.0 Performer and the 240mm Auraflow 240 got the same temperature of 65 degrees Celsius, which I find quite peculiar. I have double checked the numbers but came up with the same results too. The only difference then between the two is that the 120mm setup tends to sound a bit louder than the 240mm, but that could be due to the fans being closer to the exhaust than the 240mm. The results could be due to the fact that the 120mm still doesn't have that much problem dissipating the heat of a chip like the 1700X, as it doesn't exceed its cooling potential, and of course, it could be also a testament to the tried and proven nature of the Asetek pump design. The temperatures then are by all means not bad, but they're just a bit disappointing for me, as RGB and slight difference of sound aside, it's not really an upgrade in terms of temperatures. So then, what's the takeaway with this cooler? Well, for starters, compromises I felt had to be made in order to make this cooler happen. When taking a look at this cooler, two things become evidently noticeable: the fans and perhaps the pump and radiator cooling. Despite the fans being one of the prettier and good-looking fans with RGB on the market, they don't really push all that much static pressure in my opinion, with plenty of bounce back that could be felt when installing the fans onto a radiator. This meant that whatever much air it could push, quite a fair deal of it was being bounced backward, making it less effective at cooling the radiator. Performance aside, the fans do get quite noticeably louder on a full load, and given how well it actually does cool, I find this to be just a bit disappointing. Then we get to the cooling performance of this AIO. I'm not sure if it's just because the pump head just isn't able to cycle the liquid fast enough or the radiator just can't dissipate it fast enough, but having it perform similarly to an Asetek 120mm AIO was also quite a letdown. It's not bad, but it's just something to take into consideration given that a 240mm takes up more space. If you can overlook these shortcomings though, the RGB illumination on the block is stunning to look at. You get nice braided cables, and it's got an overall really good build quality and RGB lighting that looks pretty enough to stand out from the crowd. Sure, with the market being as saturated as it is now, it won't sit on top but rather in the mid-pack, and for what it's asking for, the Auraflow 240 gives you all that RGB goodness while not threatening to throw your wallet into a shredder. So there you have it. The results honestly wasn't quite what I was expecting, but it was still interesting to look at nonetheless. For $60 though, it's hard to find a better deal, so if you're interested in pimping up your PC with RGB bling, I think it's a good starting point. If you're looking for hardcore performance to go with that though, you might have to look elsewhere. I hope you guys enjoyed this review. If you liked it, give it a like. If you didn't, then give it a dislike or drop a comment. Make sure you subscribe and click the bell icon to get notified when new videos go live. My name is Yang aka Tech Rodent, and thanks so much for watching.